Budhaditya Chattopadhyay is a media artist and scholar. He holds a PhD in artistic research and sound studies from the Academy of Creative and Performing Arts, Leiden University, the Netherlands. Currently, Chattopadhyay is a Mellon postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Arts and Humanities, American University of Beirut. Previously, he has graduated from India's National Film School and completed a Master of Arts degree in New Media at Aarhus University, Denmark. He has been a Charles Wallace Scholar and a Prince Claus grantee. He has received numerous fellowships, residencies, and international awards.
That is the sound recorded from my balcony in Hamra a few weeks ago. So to begin with, I'll just thank you for being here and have your patience for listening to the sound from the balcony, from my balcony. So there will be a number of sound clips to be played, and that will test your patience, I think. Sound is a temporal, time-based media with a temporal evolvement, and it needs some patience to delve into the kind of auditory world or sonic world created by presenting a sound recording in a public venue like this. So I'll ask you to be patient, because there will be a lot of sound clips to be played in this talk. So I will divide the talk between two parts. The part one would be to introduce my work as an artist with sound and listening, with some clips from previous works and some slides, a little bit of glimpse of the work I have produced so far. And the second part is more a conceptual positioning of myself within the sound studies, sound art studies, and few questions, few suggestions, few propositions. I don't know if it's working. Is it working, Batul? But I think you can hear my voice in the back, right? So we don't need it. So I'll start with the very beginning. When I was 8, my sister presented me a tape recorder, a National Panasonic tape recorder. We visited Japan and returning from Japan, she bought for me the tape recorder. And that machine, recording machine, brought me to the world of sound. The first thing I was recording was my mother singing. And few things I realized before I was not aware about that. First, inception was the idea of space. And the second was the idea of media or mediation. I never realized that there is a huge sound world enveloping me or us all the time, which Christoph Cox calls the sonic unconscious. The role of the artist is to attend to that sonic unconscious and frame certain sounds from it. And that framing is your artwork, basically. So with that tape recording machine, what I was doing was looking at framing natural sound and sound that is existing in my environment. For example, the intimate sound that I knew was my mother singing, or the sound of cattle, or sound of a landscape in front of our house. And through these recordings and playing them back, I realized that when I was recording the object, each and every object I was recording, my mother's voice, for example, it was recording the object with a sense of its position in that particular place. If I would go back a little bit, further away from the object, the room was more present. So the relationship between sound and its source or the object and the space which is where the sound is posited is crucial. And that this crucial understanding was coming through my practice with sound recording. Now it's considered a practice of field recording, but field recording has a long history, anthropological, ethnographic. In ethnography, field recording has been used for many years. But in field recording has emerged in the last few years as a vibrant artistic practice. But at that time, I was not very much aware about if this is an artistic practice or not. What I was interested in finding this dynamics between space and sound, between the spatiality and the temporal evolution of a sound. So the first piece I composed was Landscape in Metamorphosis, 2008. It was based on field recordings I made in India. I'll play a little clip. That was Landscape in Metamorphosis, my first published work. I was a student at the film school, and through this, my tape recordings or recordings made in the nature, I also got the idea of the mediation. The mediation, each particular recording media has its characteristic mediation process, technological mediation. And for example, a tape has a particular sound, while a disc has a particular surface noise. And if you withdraw that surface noise, that medium would be unrecognizable. So that particular interest in a different kind of media and how they mediate sound through the technological process of recording and reproduction was something I was very much interested in exploring as well. So many of my earlier works, and also later works, are based on recordings simultaneously on multiple media: tape, MD, mini disc, digital recorder, high resolution, and lo-fi or low resolution, all together to capture different realities and different layers of realities existing in a particular place. And also the idea of mediation. Through mediation, sound appears something more abstracted, more. And later I'll talk about object disorientation, and an idea I developed through my work. And the object disorientation I will be talking about is based on this notion of mediation through different kind of technological processes. My second work, I'll be presenting a little bit of that, is Eye Contact with the City. It owns an award called Trix Arts Electronica from Linz, and based on recordings I made also in a city in India called Bangalore. I'll play a little clip. Eye Contact with the City. It was released as LG for Bangalore in 2013 by Gruen Recorder, my label. Later, I also exhibited the piece in EcoSmart in Helsinki, my first solo exhibition, dismantling a sound work in 6 easy steps in 6-channel sound installation. So the idea of mediation and also the idea of presence, because when you talk or think through mediation, the idea of presence is also you consider. Presence is the illusion of non-mediation. Recently, I was in Cairo, in the National Museum of Cairo. There is an inscription, and it says that inscription and a replica of a bust was gifted from the king of Cairo to someone from Europe who was visiting Cairo, King George or someone, I cannot remember, King George most probably. And it's written in that bust, as I could translate in English, is that the true or the blessed is he or she who has a true voice. So what is true voice here? True voice. So we can interpret it in this way, that true voice is the one who has a presence. Present, the idea of presence, which is unmediated. We always listen to each other through telephone conversations, through other medium, or even in face-to-face conversation. How much true we are to each other, it is something we can question. Are we authentic enough that we give our true presence in each and every conversation we have with others? So true voice is something, or was a value historically. And this inscription gives the idea that presence is a very important idea, a very important concept, very important notion in any kind of conversation and any kind of presentation, any kind of projection of someone in the public. So true voice is something I was also looking for in my work. But there is a fallacy, or there is a conflict involved here, that giving a true voice to a particular place or a particular situation or a particular context is also involving the mediation process of technology. I go to a place, I listen to the place, being there, and then I record it and present it as a composition. There is definitely a mediation process I go through. First the recording medium, and then the reproduction medium. For example, I reproduce in this room with this speaker system. I record with a particular microphone, particular media. So mediation is continuously happening, and I am there as an artist, as an interlocutor between the source of the sound and the medium through which I appear with my voice. So how much true I can be in this process? How can true representation I can give of myself, or how much translation and transposition I create through this recording and presentation. This is something I was continuously thinking about in my work. So the WellTemped City is the work 2014 commissioned by Musea Reina Sofia Radio Madrid. I was trying to understand whether true is a very complicated term, debatable term. What is true, what is present, what is authentic, unmediated is something we continuously reproduce. We continuously suggest that mediation doesn't exist. For example, in film or media artwork, you see places, you see faces which appear as if it's present in that frame, but it's mediated. So we continuously produce medial experience where presence is manufactured. But there is also an idea of poetic presence, where artistic work can touch upon this idea of poetic presence, where mediation is happening continuously, but still you as an artist, you create a voice, you make a voice heard, through which a place or a context or a situation appears more evocative than it is. This evocation is something important I consider as an artist. This evocation of presence. So in the WellTemped City, I recorded the vibration content of a city, particularly the vibration existing on the surface of building constructions. And I created something like this. So, WellTemped City is an artistic mediation of a city through the vibration contents recorded and reproduced through certain technological medium. For example, accelerometer. Accelerometer is a vibration measuring instrument I hacked into the system to make it as a microphone. So many unheard sounds and the vibration, like this room is a vibration content, and we cannot hear it. But if you put some auscultation or technological devices or apparatus, those sounds can be heard. And that's evocative, that make you understand that about the sonic unconscious I was talking about. The WellTemped City was presented in different contexts. For example, today's art festival in The Hague. Passage to the City is another work, also by unheard sounds recorded through a particular technological device. In this case, it's the microphone speaker array, which records the resonant frequency, the feedback, using the feedback. Passage to the City, the piece I recorded through multiple speakers and microphone arrays. It's a resonant frequency content of a particular space, which we usually in our human perception can hear. . There is another piece, Mind Your Own Dizziness, where I exhibited the passage through the city composition in a multi-channel setting. A Day in the Life of a Listener is a work I produced between 2015 and 16, exhibited at Museo d'Arte Moderno de Medellin. From 2014 to 15, I was doing ethnographic research in a number of environmentally disturbed or ecologically decayed landscapes. The piece that I produced through this ethnographic research was Decomposing Landscape. My more recent work, Exile and Other Syndromes, was developed during a residency at the Institute of Electronic Music and Acoustics, IEM, at Kunst University, Graz. In this work, I'm trying to capture the sound of what I term dehumanizing spaces, or Mark Hogge calls them as non-places, sound of non-places, in various contexts. For example, in airports, large construction sites, basements, car sheds, those kind of spaces where human beings may feel alienated. The sounds of alienation and sense of exile, estrangement from the place. It's mostly in European cities, because European cities and many of the zones in the European cities, they have this tendency to alienate an individual. I'll play a little clip from Exile and Other Syndromes. Talking Frame is another work which deals with the idea of sound object. It was premiered at ZKM, Center for Art and Media in Germany in 2017. I'll be having a solo exhibition in Amsterdam this year, a full version of the work. Nomad's Guide to Listening is an artist's book, which is also coming out this year. And Towards an Amicable End, which is under production, is generative composition, which I'll present at the Sommeil du Son Festival in Beirut in May, 10th of May. So this is in a nutshell what the kind of work I was producing in the last few years. Through this artistic trajectory, I come to a number of questions and I try to find responses through my work. One question is the idea of site specificity. I work with field recording, like many other sound artists. And field recordings are coming, or they are associated with various social, political, geological, cultural, anthropological resonances. How authentic they are when I present them in a performative or an exhibitory context. How much abstraction are deployed when they are technologically or artistically mediated. How much present they are, how much evocative they are in terms of the kind of places, spaces and contexts they are trying to capture. This is one question. The second question is how to integrate noise in our sonic world rather than abating it. The third question is kind of more or less behind most of my work, and also particularly the Expanded Object project, is that can sound as a medium or an event or a phenomenon be exhibited as an artistic object? Then the question of immersion. Immersion deals with the idea of envelopment. Sound as a medium envelops you all the time. It envelops you in 360 degree, enveloping from all the sides, from top, bottom, your surrounding your body. It's an embodied experience of being within a sonic environment, and that is often immersive. And in a particularly technologically mediated sonic environments are immersive in nature. My question was whether in an immersive environment, such as a sonic composition or an exhibition, involving multi-channel sound diffusion, in the immersive space of that work, the analytical faculty of the audience is lost, or the social, political, and other associations remain intact, or whether the audience can think through the context and content of the work when they encounter an artwork. How discursive context can be underscored within an immersive environment. The fifth question I have been asking through my work as a kind of ethos or a philosophical question from the beginning of my work, and I find this resonating with other artists' work. What is the role of listening and the listener in construing a better sonic world? If there is the idea of a betterment or betterness. So to respond to these 5 questions, I come to some propositions. The idea of adaptive perception. According to traditional sound theorists such as Murray Schafer, I think you have read Soundscape and the Tuning of the World, the book, seminal book by Murray Schafer. In this book, he is advocating for sound abatement. His point of departure is the healthy sound environment within which human beings can exist or survive. In this concern for the health, or more like a sanitary concern, it devises a two-fold idea of sound content of a place, lo-fi and hi-fi. But in my work, and many other field recording based sound artists' work, the argument is that Schafer's method is non-inclusive in nature and unnecessarily burdened with the idea of oral sanitation and urban pollution. I would like to maintain that it is important for us to hear the fuller spectrum of sounds and incorporating it in our personal experience by adaptive perception, a term I use here for the specific purpose of articulating an approach that suggests that sound pollution or an imbalance in the acoustic ecology in any given urban landscape can be considered as a lack of playful design and aesthetical mediation between sound source and the human ear. A comprehensive and inclusive understanding of the urban sonic environment involving the listener's subjectivity is a necessary prerequisite to this approach in order to gather knowledge about the sonic character and the ambience of urban sites. When a city becomes a site for artistic interrogation, such as in field recording-based works, the mimetic representation of a site tends to develop more into playful, subjective constructs, open for multiple interpretation rather than a fixed soundscape, as Murray Schafer suggested. These constructs are typically a result of intricate interplays between a recognition of the site and its abstraction in the compositional stages, utilizing the sounds extensively recorded on the field as compositional ingredients or raw materials. Field recording-based sound works often transcend the Schaferian notion of the soundscape. These works neither give substantial importance to underscoring the stereotypical sound marks of the site, nor do they intend to enhance the ecological discourse of differentiating between lo-fi and hi-fi environments. Such artworks encourage an adaptive interaction with the perception of the site, an approach through which the idea of noise is deconstructed in a more inclusive framework of a composition or sound artwork, particularly developed from recordings made on site. Auditory situation. It often happens that we become absent-minded and fall into a reverie when listening to certain sounds. These sounds can be as mundane as everyday sonic occurrences. We usually do not attend to them in our daily activities. These sonic phenomena are nothing special. They erupt and evaporate in my immediate environment during a work day without leaving any trace. However, some of these sounds do stand out here and there quite randomly and induce us to elevate ourselves to some other perceptual planes, perhaps not directly related to the object or the source, signification, or the site of these occurrences. These sounds open doors into another world beyond their intended immediate meaning or sonic objecthood. It needs to be understood why do they manage to unsettle us in such a way that we experience an elevated state of contemplation and meditation. It seems that these sounds are not specific causes for us becoming thoughtful, enjoying a sense of poetic detachment from the immediate reality. Rather, somehow a fertile auditory situation unfolds around us as the sounds occur. The subtle formation of an auditory situation transcending beyond the sonic object is a point of curiosity in my research and artistic work. This is also a conceptual trigger that drives a series of works in the realm of sound art. Here is potential for fertile intersection between sound art practice and research. Object disorientation. Let me elaborate on what I mean by the object disoriented behavior of sound. To do this, we need to go back in time and excavate the term sound object or sonic object. Pierre Schaeffer, arguably the founder of musique concrète, coined the term sound object or object sonore, which paved the way for a new kind of perception, acousmatic listening. To Schaeffer, the sound object was an intentional representation of sound to its listener. With the rise of new audio technologies, sound objects recorded on magnetic tape or other media were no longer referred to a sound source. Hence, a musical exploration of the acousmatic experience of sounds that one hears without seeing the causality behind them. The emphasis here was on the reduced listening state instead of causal listening, if we borrow Michel Chion's terms. The problem here was the imposition of this word object over sound. The intrinsic flaw in reduced listening, as Schaeffer conceptualized it in the theory of sound object, was that it assumed that sound had a priori ontological foundation that was separate and distinct from any cultural or historical associations it might had subsequently acquired. According to scholars such as Joanna Demers, this assertion is problematic on both practical and theoretical counts. Listeners indeed have difficulty hearing sounds divorced from their associations, but at the same time, it is nearly impossible for the human listening faculty not to ascribe a multiplicity of causes to a single sonic phenomenon. Furthermore, in practice, a listener is almost certain to simultaneously create imagined gestures or link a sound to its illusory myriad of sources, evoking some kind of contemplative and thoughtful imagery in this process of mental resonance and personalization of sounds into listening states. What I emphasize here is a shift in attention away from everyday numbed in attention to a careful and concentrated attention to sounds and their resonating, affecting qualities. In short, a listening to the process of how rather than the immediate what is of sounds. This spatial attention can be achieved by being mindful of sounds' fluid temporal movements from one state to the other, from the source to the perceiver, from the object to the ears, which produce an elevated experience involving the contemplative state of the listener rather than seeking an immediate meaning for the epistemic knowledge of the sound. In my artistic works, I have been exploring these ideas, underscoring the methodological question of articulating these fluid sonic states into various evocative situations, which often take poetic forms. This particular emphasis on the poetic attributes of listening provides with a context for exploring the unexpected splendor of everyday sounds and their transcendental potential as artistic ingredients. What I listen to and what you listen to may differ from one another at the perceptual level. Based on my own artistic practice with sound as well as a series of experiments and workshops, I have arrived at the concept of what I would like to call the sonic subject or the Suja Scenario. In non-Western tradition of sound studies, for example in Indian aesthetic theory, the topic of subjectivity and selfhood being embedded in sonic phenomena has been highly discussed. From the writings of S.S. Berlinge's texts, literature, we know about the concept of spota, which indicates a sound changes into subjective thinking and language and acquires meaning only after a certain explosion of sound. So he divides sound phenomenon, each or every sound phenomenon, into two parts. One is dhvani, which is the material resonance of the sound, and spota, which is the intellectual or perceptual underscoring or perceptual interpretation of the sound in language and in thinking. He states, we not only utter sounds, we can imagine sounds. One can sing a song silently. So the material or the wavy representation of sound is not enough, but the mental associations it produces is something one can consider. My works investigate why a given auditory situation appears to a drifting individual listener as liquid and amorphous. Newly heard sounds are juxtaposed with sonic memories, triggering the oral imagination. The individual listener becomes elevated from the physical side, and epistemic knowledge about the sound events that occur within the situation becomes open-ended, contributing to an unfixed, malleable, and evolving relationship between sound and the implied object when perceived in the listener's mind. John Upnancy, philosopher, phenomenological investigation in sound, he asked why in the case of the ear is there a withdrawal and turning inward, making resonant, while in the case of the eye there is manifestation and display and evidence. Brandon Lovell has expanded his discussion on listening in this line of thinking towards the context in which interpretation must always take place, and pointed out its potential to foster subjective intensities from listening to living. The answer may be found if we set aside epistemic and ontological issues of recognizing the source or object of sound and focus instead on the phenomenological, inward, and subjective perception of sound involving the self. Thus, we can examine the way memory, imagination, and the personal experience of the listener alter the character of sound in its mindful perception. I refer here to the proclamation of visionary composer John Cage. Silence is not acoustic, it is a change of mind. Taking a clear point of departure from the object-oriented sound, as explained earlier, and shifting the focus to the individual listener's own personal or subjective experience of encountering and interacting with sound in an artistic context, I propose an alternative methodology of sound art exhibition or performance, which I term autocurating, addressing a practice-based approach. I refer to the recent sound art exhibition Escuchas or Listenings at the Museum of Modern Art, Medellin. The 12 multi-channel sound works included in this major group event in 2016, including my 6.1 channel work, A Day in the Life of a Listener. I showed you a slide, were played in loop in a completely dark room of the museum, where visitors were asked to enter and experience the works without any visual reference. This kind of axiomatic auditory situation incorporates the concept of autocurating, which means that I situate the curating of sound art in the higher level cognitive thought processes between the invisible source of sound and the listener's mind that apprehends it, framing an experience of situational and immaterial phenomena that are peculiar to sound's subjective nature of emergence and unfolding at the listener's end. This method operates perhaps in the way artist Yolanda Harris puts in her doctoral thesis, to create situations where sound can affect and activate people's experience in a personal way. Central to this process is the role of the listener in making an artwork complete. Scholar Tim Rice underlines the personal inclination of listening. Listening is often described and experienced as a solitary and individual practice, sometimes deeply personal and private. My coinage of the term autocurating is based in such private modes of individual listening in the context of sound art, and highlights the participatory and collaborative aspects of listening rather than posing a fixed object in a strictly exhibitory context. What I term autocurating was already implanted in earlier practices of sound art that considered sound as phenomena and did not construe its objecthood in the artistic mediation of the production and showcasing, in what Seth Kim Cohen has termed gallery arts. An emphasis on the acousmatic experience of sound may shed more light on this method. Take, for example, Francisco Lopez's performance installations, which are usually set in dark rooms in which he situates himself at the center instead of the podium. Audiences sit in concentric circles with their backs to Lopez and are blindfolded. The surround speaker arrays are arranged across the perimeter of the room and kept invisible. Audiences are forced to minimize any actual associations with the visual parts of the performance. Although Lopez's transcendental conception of music and fetishist attention to the priority of sound inhibit the freedom he keenly desires for the audience, he nevertheless opens doors to the negotiation of the role of the listener in relation to the artwork by revealing the process of creation in the listener's mind. This process also finds resonance in Luc Ferrari's works, such as the Presque series, in which he posits a natural sonic situation for the listener. By denaturalizing in the recording what is to be re-naturalized in the listener's end as a creative process, Seth Kim Cohen has spoken of Ferrari's works as providing raw phenomenological data, a foundation from which thinking and doing proceed. This process explores the personal or private nature of listening on the one hand. On the other, it engages with the public and social ramification of sonic phenomena. We find resonance of this method in the works of artist Brandon LaBelle. He records room tones in his apartment and sends to different architects, asking them to develop an imaginary plan of the apartment, creating a participatory atmosphere. These practices accentuate the potentially raw subjective behavior of the listener in relation to a situation. What I mean by autocurating is then an extension of the process of extracting and deciphering what happens in the listener's mind while listening to a fertile auditory situation. This process may perhaps be partially quantified by the listener's behavior. This practice expands Don Ide's notion of the post-phenomenological real. Ide has talked about auscultation and similar contemporary acoustic constructive technologies for detecting and representing all sorts of bodily phenomena and vibrations, giving voice to things, the silent and unheard. Within the theoretical framework of post-phenomenology, Ide has given a number of examples from contemporary data sound image convertibility, very similar to the piece I played, the WellTemped City. Thank you.
One of the questions that you were addressing or that you were concerned with is the issue of sex specificity. My question is just like a clarification, actually, because I didn't catch the whole sentences. Is the functional abstraction. What you mean is how one achieves abstraction from site specificity? Okay.
So the blurry area between abstraction and recognition.
Right.
How much you can recognize and how much abstraction the artist is employing.
Yeah.
And Timothy Morton calls rendering. The idea of rendering is useful here. Rendering is a reducing of a sonic phenomenon into something representational.
In a way, it's very anti-Shakespearean.
Very anti-Shakespearean.
Yeah. So I've been interested in the question of site specificity, but I was posing a different kind of question. In a sense, what I was trying to ask myself, this was a couple of years ago, but I still kind of ask myself this question is, how can we talk about a place, obviously like sonically, how can we talk about a place without actually talking about it? So in a way, how do you actually represent the sounds of a particular geography, of a particular city, without necessarily falling into the trap of representation? Yeah. So yeah, that's why I'm interested in this idea of abstraction and your concerns.
Yes, I mentioned evocation and also poetic presence.
Yeah.
Poetic presence, in films or media artworks, you continuously see or hear sites, places, geographies, like street corner, a balcony, a room, a corridor, or rail station. Those kind of sites, they appear as manufactured. It's a manufactured presence, which is mediated, but still, it's a kind of representational trap it's falling into. It's trying to be authentic, trying to be present, trying to be more or less produced. But artistic work is going beyond that representation.
Of course,
Instead of poetic presence, instead of manufactured presence, is try to touch upon the idea of poetic presence. It's much more evocative.
Some other things.
Yeah. Where the presence of the artist is crucial.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Thank you, Buddha. Thank you so much.
I want to ask a question. Have you ever worked in the film industry, or have you ever worked in the film industry?
Film industry, I never worked. I
It's
didn't.
really interesting. Like when we saw what you did, and it's really like it can really fit in it, like the sounds in the movie industry.
Sure, I studied film sound for 4 years. That's my graduation.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to work in the film industry for personal reasons, because I thought that the constraints of the industry will hinder the artistic autonomy or the individuality of a listener. It's a industry dependent rules and regulations, like recording the voice only rather than the ambience, while I would prefer as an artist to focus on the ambience rather than the voice. So this kind of personal choices one needs to make. So I didn't work in the industry ever. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.